So I guess this is kind of like a part 2 of my little series about PBR. I made a similar video like this one a few weeks ago, and if you guys didn't see my other video, at the time I bought about $8,500 worth of Petrobras, which is a Brazilian oil and gas company mostly owned by the Brazilian government, and it's currently paying about a 65% dividend, according to Yahoo Finance. So I recently bought just under 1,000 shares before the ex-dividend date that happened on April 28th, and since then I've not only bought more shares, but I now have 3 dividend payments scheduled for this year, and we'll look at that in just a minute here. So Petrobras is one of the largest oil producers in the world, and it had a record year in 2022, and even though 2023 might not be as lucrative of a year as 2022, the dividend payments this year are at least something to talk about. So like we saw in the previous video I made about PBR, it paid a little over $6 a share in dividends, but that's mostly the result of how well oil and energy stocks performed last year. It seemed like every other company took a massive beating last year and had to do mass layoffs and things like that, but oil and energy stocks were just skyrocketing for basically the entire year of 2022. So PBR being one of the biggest oil and gas companies in that sector, it saw massive profits last year and then paid out those profits in the form of dividends, which is why those dividend payments were so high. And this year so far, it's looking like PBR is continuing to perform fairly well and might keep doing so throughout the year, especially if oil prices remain elevated. So pulling up my position in PBRA, as you can see, I have a little under $11,000 invested, and the stock actually jumped about 4% yesterday, and I'll talk about that in a minute here. But that makes my capital return just under $1,000, as you can see. And I've only owned this stock for about 2 months now, so that return is pretty decent, but that's still not including the upcoming dividends that I'm scheduled to receive. So because I owned shares of PBR before the ex-dividend date on April 28th, I'm now obligated to 3 different installments, as you can see, with the first one being paid out in just a few weeks here on May 26th, and that first payment is $529.54, or about 57 cents per share. Now, I currently own over 1,000 shares right now, but remember I owned 922 shares before the ex-dividend date, so any shares purchased after that date won't count towards these upcoming dividend payments. And then this next one in June was actually adjusted a little bit recently. So a couple days ago, the amount was supposed to be $500. Then a few days after that, it just disappeared. And I was kind of worried because it wasn't showing up at all on Robinhood. But then yesterday it updated and was back and adjusted to $335.75, or 36 cents per share. Not really sure why it was adjusted, but it's a few $100s less than it was just a few days ago. And then this last one is kind of interesting. It's a payment of $192.37, or 20 cents per share, for all the way in January of 2024. So with all 3 of these payments, I'm getting a total of $1,057 for about a $9,000 investment, but that's just the first round of dividend payments for this year. There should be at least 3 more dividend announcements this year, and they usually announce the amount per share as well as the ex-dividend date after they report their quarterly earnings. And this is one of the reasons why the stock jumped up yesterday. So on Thursday after hours, the company announced their Q1 earnings, which were better than expected. And then they also announced that they're planning on paying out $5 billion in dividends this year, as well as the possibility that the company might be buying back shares. And those are 2 pretty bullish signs. So when it comes to my position in this stock, despite all the good news, I'm actually planning on selling out probably half of my position within the next few weeks here. This isn't really a stock that I had planned on holding for the long term anyway, and I don't want too much of my portfolio being in this one stock either. So within the next few weeks, I'll most likely be selling a few hundred shares, probably about $7,000 worth, to lock in those profits and then spread those profits into other dividend stocks or growth stocks or dividend ETFs in my portfolio. But I'll still be holding on to some shares for at least another year and rake in the rest of those dividend payments. And I might even just continue to hold a few $1,000s worth forever if that's what I decide. And yes, I have taken into consideration that I will have to pay taxes on both the dividends and the capital gains from selling. That's just something you can't really avoid when you're investing and making trades, so that's something that I have kept in mind. Like I've said before, this is a pretty controversial stock that does come with a lot of risk since it's owned by the Brazilian government, and we all know how politics and governments can be. And that's another reason why I don't want too much of my portfolio in this stock. But let me know in the comments below what you guys think of my position in this stock and whether or not you'd consider buying shares of PBR for those nice dividend payments. And as always, feel free to leave a like on the video as well if you thought it was helpful, and I'll see you next time.